What would you do if your life depended on a game? Would your morals survive, or would your instincts take control? Netflix's Squid Game wasn't just a viral series. It was a psychological mirror. It stripped away the comforts of modern life and revealed the primal side of human nature, the side that emerges when everything is on the line. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a room where the rules are simple. Win or die. No room for second chances. No laws. No society. Just survival. This is the brutal world of Squid Game, but it's also a psychological case study that forces us to ask, what truly lies beneath the surface of civilization? At the heart of Squid Game is something disturbingly honest, that when pushed to our limits, we revert to our most primal programming, the survival instinct, a powerful, ancient force wired into the deepest parts of our brain, particularly the amygdala, which governs our fight, flight, or freeze responses. These are not learned behaviors. These are ancestral instincts, passed down through generations of humans who survived only because they reacted fast and without hesitation. When the players in the Squid Game enter the first round of red light, green light, something incredible happens. Not just in the story, but psychologically. Laughter turns into fear, confusion turns into chaos, and suddenly, the true human mind emerges. Not the social mind that obeys rules and says thank you, but the survival mind, the one that calculates risk, scans for threat, and acts before morality even has a chance to catch up. What the show does brilliantly is strip away the illusions of security. Because in truth, many of us live with a false sense of control. We believe we would never kill, betray, or abandon others. But that's because we've never truly been forced to survive. Squid Game creates that terrifying pressure cooker, and psychology shows us what that does to the brain. Neuroscience tells us that under extreme stress, our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and empathy, begins to shut down. Blood flows to the amygdala instead, the emergency center. In this state, people stop weighing long-term consequences. They stop thinking about society, ethics, or consequences. They think only in black and white. Will I survive this moment or not? This isn't fiction. It's how the human brain evolved. When our ancestors were running from predators, morality had no place. The only thing that mattered was who could hide better, climb faster, or sacrifice others to stay alive. Evolutionary psychology calls this adaptive behavior, survival tactics shaped by natural selection. In Squid Game, we see this played out in each character. Some form alliances, some become predators, and some simply freeze, overwhelmed by fear. Take the character of Sang-woo, a man who was once a scholar, calm and intelligent. But when faced with elimination, he becomes manipulative, deceitful, and even violent. Is it because he's evil, or is it because his survival instinct took over? Psychology would argue the latter. In fact, studies in situational behavior, like the Stanford Prison Experiment, show us that when individuals are placed in high-stakes environments, even those with no history of aggression can become capable of horrifying choices. But what's more haunting is that these choices don't feel wrong in the moment. The brain, under pressure, convinces itself that survival justifies everything. This is where moral disconnection begins, and it's where the boundary between human and animal fades. Even more powerful is how quickly group behavior adapts to survival environments. People seek protection in numbers, align themselves with those who seem strong, and isolate or attack the weak. This isn't because humans are inherently cruel. It's because, under threat, the social brain is overruled by the tribal brain. Us versus them. Protect the group, eliminate the threat. In the game, those who can't adapt, like the trusting Ollie, become victims of those who can. Yet it's not all bleak, because survival doesn't always mean becoming a monster. Ji-hun, the show's main protagonist, is perhaps the most powerful psychological example. Despite the fear, despite the pressure, he holds on to empathy. He shares food, protects the weak, and weeps for those he loses. What this shows us is that while the survival instinct is powerful, it can coexist with compassion. If we're aware of it, if we can recognize our fear, we can choose our response. And that's the takeaway here. Survival instinct is not evil. It's ancient. It's human. But unchecked, It can lead us to betray everything we once believed about ourselves. Squid Game doesn't invent this idea. It reveals it through games, through violence, and through human behavior under pressure. And psychology confirms it. When the system collapses, when rules disappear, what's left is not who we think we are, but what we're programmed to be. In conclusion, the first lesson we take from Squid Game is this. Human nature is not fixed. It's fluid, responsive, and shaped by context. The question is not, what would I do in the game? The real question is, what would my brain do to protect me, and could I live with it after? When we think about choice, we imagine freedom. We believe we have the power to decide who we are, where we go, and what we become. But what if that freedom is just an illusion? What if the choices we make are shaped by forces far beyond our awareness? By fear, by poverty, by desperation? Squid Game brings this question into brutal focus. The participants in the game all make a choice to return. After experiencing the first game, after watching people die, they're given an opportunity to leave. And they do. But soon after, the majority come back, willingly stepping back into a death trap. The surface narrative says, they chose this. But psychology tells a different story. Behavioral psychology, especially the concept of learned helplessness, helps explain what's really happening. This term, coined by Martin Seligman, describes a state in which people who have experienced repeated failures or trauma come to believe they are powerless to change their situation, even when opportunities appear. Over time, they stop trying. They become conditioned to believe that pain and struggle are normal, even necessary. That's the tragedy of Squid Game's players. Their lives outside the game are filled with rejection, humiliation, debt, illness, and invisibility. They don't return the game because it's safer. They return because outside, they're already dying. The psychological trap is cruel and invisible. The brain adapts to chronic stress by adjusting expectations downward. It becomes numb to hope. This is why people in difficult socioeconomic conditions often stay in toxic jobs, abusive relationships, or unhealthy systems. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering has become familiar, safe, predictable. In Squid Game, the players choose to go back, but in reality, they are reacting to a life that gave them no real options. This raises a disturbing question about free. Well, in our real world, are the poor really free if every system is stacked against them? Are people truly making free choices if every decision is a reaction to survival pressure? The illusion of choice is reinforced by society. Just like the game's masked frontman insists the players are not being forced, real-world systems claim to offer equal opportunity. But access to education, healthcare, justice, and dignity isn't equal. So when someone in poverty makes a desperate decision, we judge them as if they had the same options as everyone else. That judgment, too, is an illusion. Cognitive psychology also points to something called choice overload, when too many bad options make decision-making more difficult. In Squid Game, returning means a chance to win money and survive. Not returning means slow death in a world that ignores them. Is that really a choice? Or is it a psychological trap dressed up like freedom? There's also the factor of social pressure. When the players vote to leave the game, the ones who return do so not in isolation, but after realizing that most of the others are returning too. Humans are social creatures. We follow the group, even if it leads to danger. Solomon Ash's conformity experiment showed how easily people align with majority decisions, even when they know those decisions are wrong. The same instinct is at work here. Seeing others choose the game creates a sense of normalcy around insanity. Then comes the illusion of control. The idea that, this time I'll win. This time I'll be smarter, faster, colder. The brain loves patterns. It searches for logic in chaos. This is known as cognitive bias, specifically the optimism bias and the control illusion. These make people believe they are less likely to suffer negative outcomes than others, even in clearly dangerous scenarios. It's a psychological defense mechanism that helps people cope with impossible odds, even if it leads them back into the fire. Another layer is the way the game is designed. The bright colors, the nostalgic childhood themes, the structured rules, all of it creates a sense of fairness. Fairness is one of the most powerful motivators in human psychology. When people perceive a system as fair, even if it's deadly, They are more likely to accept the outcome. This taps into what is called just world theory, the belief that people get what they deserve. The players begin to believe that if they just play well, they will win. But the game is never truly fair. It only looks that way. What Squid Game massively shows is that free will is not about having choices. It's about having viable choices. And when people live in systems that strip away dignity, options, and hope, their decisions become mere reactions. Reactions to fear. Reactions to desperation. Reactions to a world that tells them they are replaceable. So when we talk about the psychology of choice, we must look deeper than the action. We must ask what pressure shaped it, what fear drove it, what illusion made it look like freedom when it was really a silent form of control. In the end, Squid Game doesn't just challenge its characters. It challenges us. It asks, if you were drowning and someone threw you a knife instead of rope, would you grab it anyway? And if you did, would it be fair to call that a choice? One of the most haunting aspects of Squid Game is not the violence itself, but the way the characters come to justify it. People who once saw themselves as kind, loyal, or even heroic gradually begin to make choices that betray their own values. But they don't fall apart completely. They don't break down weeping every time they do something unthinkable. Instead, they adjust, they rationalize. And that's where the psychology of cognitive dissonance comes in. Cognitive dissonance is a mental discomfort we feel when our actions don't align with our beliefs. It's that tension between who we think we are and what we've just done. Most people don't tolerate that tension for long, so the brain rushes to resolve it. Either we change our behavior, or we adjust our beliefs to make our actions feel acceptable. In survival settings like the one portrayed in Squid Game, most people choose the latter. Take the marbles game, one of the most emotionally devastating episodes of the series. Players are told to pair up, assuming they'll be working as a team. But instead, they discover that they must eliminate the very person they partner with, often someone they trusted. In that moment, the moral conflict is enormous. The characters face a horrifying choice: kill someone they bonded with or be killed themselves. But what follows is even more revealing. Some manipulate, some deceive, some beg, some accept death with dignity, and some, like Sang-woo, quietly shift their internal narrative to justify betrayal. Sang-woo's actions are especially telling. He tricks Ollie, a man who trusted him deeply, into handing over his marbles. When the betrayal is revealed, viewers are horrified. But Sang-woo isn't completely shattered. He doesn't collapse under guilt. Why? Because he tells himself, and possibly believes, that he had no choice, that it was either him or Ollie, that he had to do it for a greater purpose. This is cognitive dissonance in action. His values say loyalty matters, but his actions say survival comes first. To reduce the psychological tension, he rewrites the story in his head. This is just what had to be done. This same psychological mechanism is seen not just in the game, but in the real world. Soldiers in war, for example, often face situations where they must act against their personal ethics. To cope, they shift their perspective. I was following orders. They were the enemy. It was for the greater good. In both War and Squid Game, the brain protects itself from guilt by constructing a narrative where the action feels justified, even necessary. Another relevant concept is moral disengagement, a theory developed by psychologist Albert Bandura. It describes how people detach from their moral standards in order to carry out harmful behavior without feeling personal accountability. In the context of Squid Game, moral disengagement becomes a survival tool. Players don't see their opponents as human anymore. They become obstacles, threats, statistics. Dehumanization makes it easier to pull the trigger, steal the marble, or watch someone fall. Once the mind strips away personal connection, empathy fades and morality is paused. What makes this more disturbing is how quickly it happens. The shift from guilt to justification doesn't require years of conditioning, just a few games. When human beings are repeatedly placed in situations where survival depends on suppressing empathy, the brain adapts frighteningly fast. What was once unthinkable becomes normal. And this isn't science fiction, it's proven. In Milgram's famous obedience experiment, participants willingly deliver what they believe were deadly electric shocks to strangers, simply because an authority figure told them to. Afterwards, most didn't say, I was a monster. They said, I had no choice, just like the players. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of Squid Game is that the moral dissonance doesn't always come from selfishness. Sometimes it's born from love. In the same marbles game, two women, S.A. Biok and Jeong, sit together knowing one must die. They don't fight. They talk. They share stories. And in the end, Jeong gives up her life willingly. She resolves her dissonance by choosing a narrative where her death has meaning. That's another way we reduce mental discomfort, by assigning purpose to pain. Even in sacrifice, the mind searches for order, for a story it can live with. In survival environments, morality becomes elastic. The harder the choice, the more the brain works to explain it away. And this isn't just about fiction. We all do this in small ways. When we ignore a homeless person and walk by, when we stay silent during injustice at work, when we say, it's not my problem, our brain doesn't scream you're being heartless. It whispers you can't help everyone. Someone else will handle it. You're just protecting your peace. That's the psychology behind inaction, behind moral dissonance, behind the silent ways we reshape our conscience to fit our comfort. Squid Game didn't invent this idea. It just held up a mirror and asked what we'd see if we were under the same pressure. Would we cling to our values? Or slowly, silently, begin to rewrite them? There's a moment in Squid Game when the lights go out in the dormitory and chaos erupts. Players begin attacking each other with homemade weapons, forming alliances, targeting the weak, and sleeping in shifts for protection. What was once a shared nightmare turns into something even more dangerous, a battlefield divided by fear and loyalty. What causes this shift? Psychology has an answer: group dynamics and the in-group/out-group phenomenon. Humans are wired for belonging. From our earliest ancestors to modern societies, our survival is always dependent on tribes, on knowing who is us and who is them. This instinct, deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology, helps us form bonds, develop trust, and create safety in numbers. But it also comes with a darker side. When our brain identifies a group as not one of us, empathy decreases and aggression can rise. Squid Game magnifies this reality by placing people in a high-stakes environment where trust is currency and betrayal is inevitable. Social psychologist Henri Tajfel, in his famous minimal group experiments, showed how easily people form group loyalties. Even when the division is arbitrary, people will favor their own group and discriminate against others simply for being different. In the game, players quickly form cliques based on strength, age, or past connections. These groups provide temporary safety, but they also begin to turn against outsiders. The stronger the bond within, the sharper the hostility becomes toward those outside. This division intensifies under stress. The dormitory scene isn't just about fear of being killed. It's about protecting one's group. Players begin to see others not as fellow survivors, but as threats to limited resources, especially when food and sleep become scarce. This is known as realistic conflict theory, the idea that limited resources breed competition, which leads to conflict. It's not unique to fiction. We see it in wars over land, racial tensions, and even playground fights over toys. The brain reacts the same way every time. Defend your group, eliminate the threat. The leaders of these groups often emerge not because of wisdom or morality, but because of dominance. Deok-soo, the gangster, rises to power through intimidation and force. Others follow him not because they respect him, but because they fear the alternative. This dynamic mirrors authoritarian group psychology, where people align with strong, controlling figures during times of uncertainty or chaos. The logic is simple: better to be on the side of power than to be its victim. But group behavior doesn't just lead to violence. It also leads to moral fading. Once part of a group, individuals feel less personal responsibility for their actions. This is known as de-individuation, a psychological state where people lose self-awareness and become more likely to act in ways they normally wouldn't. The dormitory violence shows this perfectly. Players who were once reluctant to harm others suddenly become capable of brutality, as if the group's decisions overrule their conscience. It's no longer I hurt someone, it's we had to protect ourselves. At the same time, those who don't belong to any group suffer the most. The isolated players, the old, the weak, the quiet, become easy targets. This reflects how society often treats those who don't fit a defined category. People outside our in-group receive less empathy, less protection, and often more blame. Studies in empathy show that our brains mirror neurons, the ones that make us feel others' pain, are more active when observing people we relate to. When someone feels like the other, our compassion switches off. Squid Game doesn't invent this. It merely exposes it. And yet, not all group dynamics are harmful. Some characters, like G.I. Hun, S.A. Bayok, and Ollie, form microgroups based on trust, compassion, and shared values. These relationships, though rare in the game, show the other side of in-group psychology, the potential for protection, loyalty, and emotional support. But even these bonds are fragile in an environment that rewards betrayal. The moment the game's rules shift, those bonds are tested. Because in survival settings, groups aren't built for the long term. They're temporary shields against a constantly shifting threat. What this teaches us is unsettling. Under the right conditions, anyone can become tribal. Anyone can form an in-group and justify cruelty to outsiders. Not because they're evil, but because their brain tells them it's the safer choice. This isn't limited to extreme settings. It happens in workplaces, classrooms, online communities, and political systems. Us versus them. Right versus wrong. Winner versus loser. Squid Game simply strips away the polite surface of society to reveal how quickly we divide when stakes are high. It asks, what would you do if trusting the wrong person meant death? And more importantly, how do you define who the wrong person is? Group psychology, especially the tension between in-groups and out-groups, is not just a theory. It's a lens through which we can understand everyday division, conflict, and even acts of violence. And if we ignore it, if we keep pretending we're immune, we'll never recognize how easily fear can make enemies out of strangers. In Squid Game, the violence is obvious. The fear is constant. But beneath the blood-stained floors and deadly games lies a quieter, more unsettling reality. The psychological weight of poverty, inequality, and the invisible systems that keep people trapped. The series doesn't just shock the audience with graphic scenes. It forces us to confront how class divides are not only financial, they are mental. They shape how people think, how they behave, and how far they're willing to go for a chance at something better. All the participants in the game have one thing in common. They are deeply in debt, struggling to survive, and see no viable escape from their misery. But what stands out is how quickly they accept the terms of the game, how easily they agree to risk their lives. That's not because they are reckless or thrill-seeking. It's because they've been conditioned by years of hopelessness. When people live in systems where the odds are always against them, they begin to believe that suffering is inevitable and that extreme solutions are their only hope. This is where psychology meets economics. Living in poverty doesn't just affect what's in your wallet. It reshapes your brain. Research shows that chronic financial stress impairs cognitive function. It reduces memory, decision-making ability, and increases impulsivity. When survival consumes every thought, long-term planning becomes almost impossible. Psychologists call this scarcity mindset, a condition where people under constant resource pressure focus only on the immediate problem, often making decisions that worsen their future. In Squid Game, this is precisely what drives the players. They don't have time to think about morality, dignity, or long-term consequences. They're focused on today's chance, no matter how dangerous. And when you've been crushed by systems that never helped you, the idea of a clean, rule-based competition, even a deadly one, can feel like the fairest opportunity you've ever had. But the most disturbing part is the psychological manipulation at play. The game is designed not just to test physical strength, but to exploit emotional and mental vulnerability. From the nostalgic design of the playgrounds to the illusion of fairness in the rules, everything is built to create a false sense of hope. This mirrors how real-world systems often give the illusion of opportunity, while knowing the outcome is already rigged. The players are told the game is fair. Everyone has an equal chance. But fairness only exists when everyone starts at the same line. In truth, the players carry unequal emotional burdens. Some are too trusting. Some are too traumatized. Some are physically weak. And yet, they are judged by the same deadly standard. Just like in real life, where meritocracy is preached but inequality prevails. The show also paints a chilling picture of those who watch the game, the mass elites who bet on lives for entertainment. They're not just villains. They're a metaphor for how the privileged often view the suffering of the poor, as distant, as disposable as entertainment. When the VIPs comment on the players like racehorses or bet on who will survive, they echo a truth that exists in many societies, that those at the top, detached from the struggle, often forget that the people below are human beings, not statistics. From a psychological standpoint, this detachment is explained through moral disengagement and empathy fatigue. The more distance we place between ourselves and suffering, whether through physical space, wealth, or ideology, the easier it becomes to stop caring. The VIPs are not born monsters. They are shaped by a system that has numbed them to pain, rewarded them for dominance, and trained them to find pleasure in control. On the other side, the players are equally conditioned not to enjoy violence, but to accept it. This is a critical insight, that people who live in poverty or under oppression don't necessarily become violent by nature, but they become numb to injustice. They stop expecting fairness. They stop being surprised by cruelty. And once that expectation is gone, the brain adapts. What should be shocking becomes ordinary. This adaptation is a survival mechanism. When injustice is constant, outrage becomes exhausting. People stop fighting and start enduring. They normalize their pain. And this is the most tragic form of psychological conditioning, when people begin to believe they deserve their suffering. In Squid Game, many players don't even question the morality of the game. They just ask, how can I win? That's what systems of inequality do. They not only divide people by wealth, but by worth. They plant the idea, quietly, over years, that some lives matter more than others, that if you're poor, failure is your fault, that if you're struggling, you must not have tried hard enough. These beliefs are internalized, and once they take root, people stop asking for justice and start fighting each other for scraps. Squid Game is a violent metaphor, but the emotions it portrays are very real. The shame of debt, the fear of hunger, the desperation to protect one's family, the willingness to take one final risk. It shows how inequality doesn't just rob people of resources. It steals their dignity, warps their thinking, and turns survival into a game with impossible rules. In the end, the game isn't just on an island. It's everywhere. In every city, in every economy, in every system that tells people they have a choice, when in truth, their path has already been shaped by forces beyond their control. The question is, will we keep watching like the VIPs? Or will we finally see that behind every player, there's a person whose only real crime was being born on the wrong side of the line? So, what does Squid Game really show us? It's not just a fictional nightmare or a twisted competition. It's a psychological lens, brutally focused, on who we are when everything is stripped away. It forces us to confront truths we often ignore. That beneath the mask of civility, comfort, and order, we are still wired for survival. That choice isn't always freedom. That morality bends under pressure. That our need to belong can divide us. And that inequality is not just economic. It's psychological, inherited, and deeply embedded into how we think and behave. Each player in the game was fighting more than death. They were fighting identity, guilt, shame, fear, and a system that had conditioned them to believe this was their only option. Their struggles weren't the result of bad luck. They were the result of a world where the odds were never in their favor. The power of Squid Game lies in its brutal honesty. It tells us that we are all playing games. Some of us are just playing with better rules, while others are forced to risk everything for even the illusion of a way out. And perhaps the most important question it leaves us with is not who would survive the game, but who do we become when survival is all that's left? Will we still recognize ourselves? Will we still call it choice? And most of all, are we really as different from the players as we think? The truth is, the game never ends. It just wears a different face. In our workplaces, our societies, our systems, and even in our daily decisions, we are all players. The only difference is, some of us still believe we're not.